Hello,
Hello,
how are
hello,
you,
hello.
everybody?
Keep it
How are you,
coming.
Leslie? You know,
Good. How are you
sunny
doing?
day today here in Colorado, 75 degrees. So,
Okay.
yes,
So
I
you're
am
back home from the mountains, huh?
back in the office, which I just noticed I had to change to close my locker. It's never good to show everybody your locker. It's just not right.
He's
Yeah,
such a
it's got
coach, y'all.
that stuff. But but I'm prepared. I can change clothes in a moment's notice. That in itself causes me stress. My locker. Oh, geez, I, I should have looked at this note a lot longer. Hey, Wayne,
Hey, hey, what's going on?
it's summertime in River City.
Oh yeah, it's nice outside today. We're not used to I know it's Southern California, but we're not used to all this nice sunshine as of the past couple months.
You actually have humidity.
Yeah,
The rain is evaporating.
yes,
It
yeah.
never rains
That
in
was not the
Southern
case for the
California.
past 2 months.
It never rains in
Oh,
You
so
guys
much.
had a
Oh
lot of
my
rain
gosh,
out there.
like yeah, it was pretty bad. Like, well, good for California because we need the water, but bad for people in the mountains and houses sliding off and accidents, yeah, all that. But California is definitely not prepared for
My
water
goodness.
when it comes. Yeah,
Oh, and you said
yeah,
houses sliding off. Let me tell you, those houses that live on those cliffs, I mean, that are situated on those cliffs,
yeah.
are I could not imagine living like that, hanging off a
But with
cliff.
all this rain, they're not on it. They're not hanging off the cliff no more. They're on the side of the highway
Yeah,
now.
or they're in the ocean.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, yeah.
that's horrible. Horrible. Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm good.
How
Yeah.
how are you doing, Wayne?
The weather's nice this week, so I'm excited. Today was a little windy, but I think as of Thursday it goes up to 70s, then 80s, and I think we're good at that point. So I can start back getting outside running again and not have to wear a sweater.
Okay. Well, I just got back from Pennsylvania. I sold several magazines
Wow,
and books. It was amazing, and I'm getting
that's
ready. I'm going to do
so
a book
awesome.
signing. So I am. I just.
That's
So I'm
huge.
excited about that. I Let me tell you, I sold a lot of
Yes.
subscriptions, more subscriptions than regular
Wow,
magazines. So that's
congratulations
amazing.
on that.
Thank you. Thank you. So, guys, we'll give it one more minute. It's 7:04. We'll give it one more minute. And then we'll get back into the topic. We're going to continue our topic on trauma, PTSD. We are not, however,
Yeah.
going to talk about sexual
Yeah.
trauma. I
I,
just feel there's
yeah.
too many triggers with that. And I think that, when you guys leave this space, you're just not going to have the appropriate tools to
I agree.
decompress. So we
I
won't
just
talk
keep.
about that. But we recognize that it does take place. So if you know anyone that wants to come in tonight, is going to be specifically on trauma and elite athletes. So I'm looking forward to having
I
that
just get
discussion.
triggered when I hear the word
So we'll
sexual.
just give it.
I just whoa, whoa, whoa. Oh, it's been such an interesting week already. It's only
Yeah, I was gonna
Monday.
ask you, how was your week? How's your week been?
Well, it's been a week long of weather changes, from snow and ice to sunshine and heat to then some wonderful, refreshing rains, which we all need. But I mean, this is the critical storm for me, the eye of the storm, because I've got baseball has started, football draft is next weekend, not this one coming up, the weekend after. So there is OTAs have started. And then after that, rookies will come in after they've been drafted and they're all there. I mean, I guess in some regards, there's somebody in that whole cultural twist of athletics and sports at the college and pro level that has trauma of some kind.
Oh yeah.
Because they're
Yeah.
dealing with all kinds of different energy and forces, and you never know who's the one you're supposed to listen to if you're a youngster, or and even if you're not. It's especially here in Denver. We've got a new coach with Sean Payton, who's a Super Bowl champion and also very controversial coach. He got suspended for a year, kicked out. And then when he came back, they still weren't happy with him, and then they let him go. Yeah. So he went into broadcasting. So he's now back after being almost 5 years into broadcasting, and there are those who question whether or not he's current. He's up to speed with the attitudes of the youngsters. It's a whole new generation of athletes, and he's.
Yeah.
Well, let's get started, because that's actually going to be a good topic to speak about too. Because I think we talked before, a lot of these athletes don't have a backup plan, and things happen, and that could be traumatic within itself. And how do you bounce back, right, without a plan? So let's just get started. So hey guys, how are you? My name is Dr. Leslie Rogers. This is Let's Talk Men's Mental Health, part 2 of trauma, PTSD. You have Dr. Lowell Whiteman on here. He works with elite athletes, Coach Whiteman. And you have Wayne Lassane, who's also working toward getting his certification in mental health. I don't know, guys. I don't know if you guys can hear this noise in the background. This is what happens when you work from home. So I don't know, something's in the beat.
Are they friendly forces? They're not alien, right? They're friendly forces.
Yes.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah. So, but hey. So tonight is part 2 of PTSD. And so we'll get started. So, I just want to do a recap really quickly, because last week we went on PTSD, and we'll just go over the 5 things real quick. I'm not going to get into it, but I'll just repeat what the 5 things were in order to have a PTSD diagnosis. So you got to have exposure. You got to be exposed to a traumatic event, right? Exposure, directly experiencing, witnessing, or learning of a traumatic event that have taken place. Intrusive thoughts, recurrent involuntary or intrusive distressing memories or dreams of the traumatic event. Avoidance. Avoidance is big in PTSD. Efforts to avoid distressing memories, thoughts, or feelings about or associated with the traumatic event. Negative alterations in cognitions or mood. Can't remember important aspects of the event. A lot of people, when a traumatic event happens, you can't remember bits and pieces of it. Distorted thoughts, negative emotional states such as fear, anger, guilt, etc., and feeling detached or estranged from others. Then alterations in arousal, anger, aggression, reckless behaviors, hypervigilance, exaggerated startle response, concentration concerns, sleep concerns, and in kids present differently. We talked about that last week too, especially kids at the age of 6 years old and younger. Kids might engage in repetitive play, or themes or aspects of the event are expressed, frightening dreams without recognizable content, etc. Like kids might say a monster is under my bed or something like that. So we have to be mindful when we're working with kids or talking to kids, because kids may not disclose as adults disclose, or kids may not present as adults present, right? So just keeping that in mind when we're talking about trauma and PTSD. Okay, so Dr. Whiteman, tonight we're going to talk about PTSD and sports, and specifically athletes, and what that looks like. And I thought it would be important to talk about, for you to tell, one, why is this topic important? Why are we talking about PTSD with athletes, right? One, why is it important? And then what are some examples of trauma. What are some examples that athletes experience when you talk about trauma? So when you
Yeah,
talk about like, why is it important?
yeah.
Maybe give a
The
couple examples of
important
what it would
thing
look
I
like.
think has been there for a long, long time, and has been handled behind the scenes. I don't know if you two are even old enough to remember the book called North Dallas 40, and then they made a movie out of it, and it was really about drugs. But throughout the script of that movie was the underlying byproduct and why the athletes took drugs. The movie initially talked about, you get an injection in your knee and then you can go back out and play. And there's all these cascading components. So one of the things I want to mention is that we're now starting to come out and actually talk about stressors and anxiety, the disorders that are associated with it in behavior response to those stressors and the pressures that come from the traumas that they inflict. So it's been there a long time. We're now starting to make it aware because the public, the non-sport folks, have started to be more focused on it. Interestingly enough, in my experiences with the pandemic, that has been a great source for opening the windows and throwing back the curtains and shedding some light on the scenery and the environments that athletes at all levels, not just professional, but any competitive athlete. And I would hesitate to say that it goes down too far into the teens, maybe 14 and up. So high school, maybe middle school, but high school for sure. And I'll admit there are pockets of high performance athletics at the club level with ages 9 and up. So I'm not going to dismiss that there aren't stressors down there as well, but I'll caveat it and say that too often when children respond in ways that we just don't expect them to respond, it's based on our own definition of the neighborhood, our community, our religion, whatever comes into play to define how you think kids should act, and then we label them. Oh my God, the kid just pulled out a gun in class and shot his teacher. Must be something traumatic and stressful for that child. They're actually starting to, for that case in particular, talk about PTSD. There must have been a trauma, a stressor. Let's put him into therapy for dream therapy and see if he's really and I say time out. So in our discussion today, we're going to talk about pretty much from 14 years old and up, a lot of focus on college and pros because those are more mature, cognitively aware to a certain degree. Don't get me wrong. So our talking points are based on that presumption is that almost any athletic endeavor is a contact sport. Just knowing that and then saying it out loud tells us it's a trauma. There is a traumatic incident that's there. It doesn't necessarily move towards a cognitive, mental type impact traumatically or stress-wise. Now it can. And I'll talk about specific examples of that when we start talking about things like TBI, traumatic brain injuries. We start talking about recovery from an injury, where an athlete is not just hurt, sutured up, unable to play the game, but it's because of that they become stressed and trauma starts to set in because they want to be playing. Just like a military person who comes out of theater has to get recovered, has to get back on track emotionally and mentally, and they want to rush back quicker than they really should. Same thing with an athlete. This is what they do. This is how they get paid. So at the pro level, their trauma is exacerbated with severe injuries, be it TBI or some other injury, by the fact that they are a performer. They have a job to do that they're really good at, and if they don't get to do it, socially, I can't take care of my family. Community, I'm letting people down in my community, my fans, my coach. I mean, all of a sudden it just becomes this avalanche of emotional situations that come in. And we're just now starting to understand what does that look like when that happens, and to what levels of those layers we're pulling back is that athlete actually being impacted, and to what degree of that. Now, that being said, the other talking point is about assessment tools. What do we do to understand the proclivity of an athlete coming in as a rookie, which the next 2 weeks to 3 weeks, they're going to be assessed more than they've ever been before. And that includes the combine. When they're poked and prodded and jumped and run and push weights, they're going to do it again once they join the team that they're drafted on, because they'll do a psychological review, an in-depth psychological review. Now, sadly, that doesn't talk about stressors. That doesn't look at anxiety. What it looks at, as goofy as it is, they look at capability. Can you add up numbers? Are you a logical thinker and can go, I can see part A, then part B, and come up with D, E, and F? Because that's a progression. If it's a quarterback, the term progression is used a lot. Are you thinking progressively? Is your executive part of your brain processing? So what happens is, and what we're talking about doesn't get reviewed, does not get assessed deeply enough. If it was, they would start. Say that again.
It doesn't get at all. The mental health, the mental aspect of it doesn't get assessed at all. Unless
something happens, exactly, and that usually is 3 to 5 years down the road. You know, when the real physical trauma, emotional pressures that come as a result of the sport land on the athlete. Now, that being said, many of these athletes have already experienced traumatic incidences in college, and now they should be truly assessed as a pro in the areas of behavioral issues, behavioral psychology, the influence of social pressures, all the things we've talked about already related to anxiety. So one of those talking points is, what is the mental assessment that needs to be combined with training and awareness? There is no training and awareness about, hey, if you see your teammate doing this or not saying this, or a combination of those things, which causes them to act in a way that they seem like they're off on their own, or they're always off to the side. They don't interact in team activities. The only time they get animated and productive is when they're on the field hitting somebody. Those are pretty strong signals that you need to be having a conversation with that young person. And training and awareness programs would support lifting those players up, leveling them up to a different layer, and in some cases, in the technical jargon, is leveling down. Just hey, because they get amped up. Anybody starts talking about their brain or their body not functioning properly, say, "Well, I'm not hurt. I'm not sick. Why are you talking like that? I'm not ill." And so we need to make sure that language and that awareness and training is in a way that doesn't alienate them, doesn't scare them into thinking you're trying to make, because they immediately go to the negative and defensive. They think we're trying to make a case to hold them back from being able to play. And that particular set of examinations happens at college, and yet not as it relates to the sport. Here's a real short story. I had a player who was, he had dyslexia. We discovered it. And you should also know, high school records do not come in their full form to college academically. We only get what we test for in college. Like if you don't do a reading test, we don't know what their reading capability is until they start failing. So a lot of colleges at Division I level are testing kids to know what's your reading skills, what's your math skills, to make sure you're properly put in the right classes. Do you need support? So this young man, we discovered, had dyslexia. So we were going to get his books put onto digital formats, all of his books, so he could listen to them being read to him through the robotic reader. Well, the place you have to go to finish that paperwork is also the place that any student with any disabilities or needs for support would go. So he and I are sitting waiting for our number to be called to go up and fill out the paperwork. And two students come into the waiting area, one in a wheelchair and one on crutches. And the one on crutches was obviously something like multiple sclerosis, something, because their body was twisted and contorted, and then the person in the wheelchair. My player stood straight up and started walking out, mumbling, "I'm not sick. I'm not supposed to be here. This is not what I'm going to do." So he immediately put himself into a stressful situation simply because he didn't want to be perceived as being different or in need of any kind of help that made him look like he was less than who he was on the basketball court. Fortunately, now he's a dad and he's also a pro basketball player in South America. So Daniel and I overcame that. But my last talking point is that there's a proactive movement by cultures, by communities, to demystify the stigma of mental illness, or make the stigma continue to reside in mental illness. It should be about mental wellness and proactivity, about systems and programmatic processes that help the awareness and the learning about this, so that it's not so voodoo, it's not so dark, because it doesn't have to be. We all are susceptible to any and all kinds of stressors and stimulus that will tip the scale for us. So those are the 4 areas that I really want to talk about, and we'll talk about the questions you asked within those discussions, Leslie, and match them up to the points that you led with about the exposure, memories, forgetfulness, thought distortions, and those mood swings, which I'll start at the bottom to move forward. Typically, that's where we see it's after they've been exposed to too much trauma that we realize they are suffering from some form of PTSD or an anxiety plus. It's almost a compounding effect. It's a layering on, and it manifests itself in a very aggressive way when you find, because they'll self-medicate. They'll go out and recreational drugs, alcohol, both, and then that trigger. Then somebody says something, they get triggered, and they literally pull out a trigger. And there's shootings, there's violence, and then when if they're allowed to start digging to find out really what the root cause was, it's because of the environmental situations that caused this,
Right.
And the lack of the culture's sensitivity to really address it.
Yeah. So we want to make sure, because I want to make sure. So when we talk about PTSD, we're talking about witnessing or having experienced yourself a violent act, or
Right,
activity, etc. Right.
But remember,
so we talk. Yeah, we talk about talking about the experiences that these athletes go through, and it's like physical trauma, right?
Yeah.
And
I mean,
is that? Or are you talking about?
I think they're both.
Are you
they're
talking?
both in the same, Leslie. The physical trauma is an accident. I mean, a football block, a tackle, is equated to a 30-mile-an-hour car running into another car. Well, in this case, it's human beings, and those are traumatic situations. And what we haven't really examined very closely is how many of the participants on the sidelines or actually in the game watching stuff go on look at that, go, my God, that was just traumatic. I mean, whoa. How many times has any of us seen a replay of an ankle being manipulated because of the force and the thrust? How many of us have seen a tackle in slow motion where the paint on the helmet flecks off because of the power that kid was hit with? We don't examine that, to your point about seeing an accident, witnessing a traumatic event. Well, it happens every 3 minutes in a football game. And that has an impact.
Right. And that's why I asked the question, because I think it's a lot of people probably sit back and think, well, what is that? How is that a traumatic incident? Or how is that a traumatic? People actually evened out on the field, when they're, have these accidents, you have deaths. Even in high school, these college students, football players are dropping dead on the field, right? Of a heart attack.
Thankfully, it doesn't happen often, but it still happens. And I think the percentages, if you compared the percentages of fatal accidents on playing fields to the fatalities on a highway, I think an aggregate on an annualized basis, the numbers wouldn't be too far apart, because I would put all sports together and look at all the sports and their fatal accidents, and then all accidents on the highway. So it's there is some numerical evidence to show that we need to be more considerate of what's going on in sports, because kids will see this. Athletes will see this. Families will see this because of our technology. It's
Yeah.
Look at I've got pictures in my files of baseball players at home plate with their heads contorted backwards and their helmets are forward. It was all in slow motion, and a baseball sits in their mouth because the pitcher hit them. Or a baseball bat in pros, the wooden bats, the only ones they use, it gets shattered, and a shard of the bat takes out the left leg of the pitcher.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty traumatic stuff.
Yeah. And that's what I wanted examples, because again, when we talk about PTSD, I want viewers to see that, you know, sports can be as traumatic as well. That's why I wanted you to kind of, you know, talk about this and explain, you know, especially when you're talking about trauma and PTSD. There are significant events that take place, traumatic events that take place in the sports arena. Athletes have to deal with, like, after the event has taken place, the athlete has to,
well, and there's,
you know,
there's some incidents, because we haven't put enough of a light on it, that happen off the competitive field. It's in the practice field. It's in the locker room, in the weight room. I mean, I've had to be, not have to be, I was, because I responded, part of a crew that lifted 300 pounds of metal off of the chest of an athlete trying to do a bench press. Well, he had done too many reps. He'd already worked out for an hour. He was exhausted, and he still wanted to try to push his max. Didn't bring a spotter, and it failed. And if we hadn't gotten to him before it hit his chest, it would have probably killed him. But everybody in that room saw that traumatic event. And it did impact the mental state and wellness of every athlete that, because I talked to every one of them that was with me trying to hold the bar up before hitting.
Yeah. So I think that these are definitely the important things to talk about, because I think that people tend to view athletes as superheroes, and they don't really get to see that you know, they're human just like everybody else. And you know, if we can, you know, again, they need probably a little bit more compassion, a little bit more care, a little bit more tenderness, because of the jobs they have and an environment that they're in constantly, and just the state of the mindset you have to be in to play in at sport. The sports like that, any sport, professional sport at just a high level, you have to have a different mentality, you know. And it makes me think about, you know, I knew somebody who played in the league, talking about football, because back to what your point is, that, you know, they do different things to try to help them, whatever. And they were taking Adderall as a performance enhancer to slow the game down for them. You know, they weren't even on Adderall, but if somebody on the team would be on the prescription, they would get it from them. And, you know, and just to know these type of things, and just the measures that people go through to be able to perform at this high level of sport, to put their body through, and how people get cortisone shot. Again, I don't think the public actually knows to the extent of what really happens to athletes and what athletes have to do to endure to be able to go on the field and perform every week, week in and week out. You know, and we take it for granted because, oh, he's so tough, or he's so strong, or he's so big, he can take it. And really, he's really suffering, you know, to put his body through these things to be able to show up, you know. And I just think that people, they can understand that, they could be a little bit more kinder to athletes and what athletes ask for, you know, and how they show up in the world. And when you approaching them, how you would talk to them as opposed to how we approach them, because it's, you know, how we do in the society. So
no,
because it's not really talked about.
It's getting better, but we have a long ways to go in making the message accurate, and that it fits the sport or sports. It's not the same for every sport. It's different. But we have pushback from the alumni. You know, we've got pros that are now alumni, and they're coaches, and they are still coaching with the same fire and brimstone that they were brought up with. And that isn't necessarily a fit, because the kids have changed.
Yes,
they are more aware of what's going on. Right. The equipment has changed. And even though those are not traumatic accidents that you watch and witness, that memory sticks in your head, the memory is there for different reasons. It still creates trauma. You watch a coach emphasize messages about hurting yourself, and they want you to. They
Yeah.
want you to go out and perform at a level that it will hurt you. Now, it may be just a contusion, a deep tissue contusion, but it hurts. And I tell you, if athletes were to have to go out with their shirts off before they play a game, so people could see all the different colors on their body from practice, they would know that young person came to that game with a lot of sacrifice, and
Yeah.
that's trauma.
Yeah.
Mhm. I remember compared it to when we talked before. You compared it to like
Yeah.
basic training in the
Yeah.
military.
I was gonna say that I think that in talking to, sorry, just lost my train of thought. I had it a minute there, but it was talking. I
You get
know, right?
old.
Yeah. I think it
I
was
said,
speaking
oh,
to just the again back to the performance level of exact. Oh, I know what it was. So I think, like, to your point, Dr. Lowe, is that these older coaches, want to still, they feel like the sports are getting softer when really it's just more care. It's being more caring to the people who are participating in the sports, athletes. And
Yeah.
so, and I think that talks to the masculine culture that we have as men, which again prevents us from going to seek out the help that we need because we don't want to feel soft or feel weak. And so this is all a cycle that we're caught up in, and we're literally talking about when it comes to all these different things, but why men suffer, and the reason they suffer is because of this attitude that we have and how we have to appear in the world, how we have to show up, when in all reality we need to be more caring and more understanding, so then we can perform at our highest level because we are getting the help that we need.
Well, and Wayne, that's a good.
but what happens is when you try to suppress it, it interferes anyway. So you're so busy trying to stop it or, immobilize, what you're going through from everybody. You're wearing this mask so everybody won't see it. But eventually it starts to like leak, seep out, out in performance. It impacts performance. Either it's in interpersonal relationships. It impacts relationships with either your loved ones or family or children, etc. So in some way, it is still detrimental to what you're doing. Performance anxiety is real, and that's what, when you talk about this trauma and what athletes go through, I imagine that it can result in a bit of performance anxiety as well. How is it going to impact my performance going forward? How am I going to look to the world? We saw it with Simone and what's the other female?
Yeah.
Naomi. Yeah. I think that, society, like you said earlier, Wayne, society looks at these athletes as if they're unhuman, and so that they don't have an opportunity to kind of be vulnerable and break down, if you will, right? Because we all deal with mental health challenges. And then when you do deal with the challenges, then you're criticized for it, or you're ostracized for it, or you're demeaned.
And also, sometimes athletes don't even recognize it within themselves, right? When you see an athlete on the field, they do something like let's say Antonio Brown, when he quits in the middle of a game. What there has to be something more going on there than that's just so simple, right? But people don't understand it. They don't care because they just want to be entertained, and they don't take into consideration all the other parts that play into that. And so,
well, is it that they don't care, or you just don't kind of think about it? You just don't, you're so consumed with the sport itself, you don't have that opportunity to kind of think about what you're going through. I think that people were sit back and kind of think about it, process it a little bit, I think that people would care. So I don't know.
They're played a little bit. Their caring is pushed off to the side because they're not given enough information at the point of the incident. Yeah. When he left the field, took off his shirt, thumbed his nose, and there were classic components of PTSD in that. He was forgetting some of the points and being emotional about the things he forgot. He was distorting his own thoughts about the realities of what was going on at the moment. And it wasn't just that one incident in that game that caused his PTSD reaction. He had already had economic stress. He had the stress of the game and management that were traumatic events. He was being emotionally bullied by coaches and administrators. There was a whole compounding effect. And so the press and the league did not send any messages to the fans to give them any clarity. And quite honestly, that exacerbated the stress on that player, because now people went, the extremes were they're going to continue to chastise him.
Yes.
The other extreme is, well, he's my favorite player. I own his jersey. I'm going to believe that he's okay, and I want him to be okay. But it's the root cause. The root cause is we've got to be better at programmatic messaging and awareness about what's really going on, and still being mindful of protecting the privacy of that athlete.
I love that. Yes, I love that. That makes a lot of sense. And to you, I agree that they don't give enough information to where the concern can start to come in, you know, and be more caring for the person that is, you know, that is going through the thing. Yeah.
Well, and that whole cascade of things we just said, again, brings us to a greater probability of more physically consequential behaviors, the mood swings, the distortions of those moods because of the bad communication. You know, God forbid they pull a gun or they get in their car and use it as a weapon.
Yeah.
I mean, that has happened.
Yeah.
And when we really start, and I've looked at the details, not able to bring out any names, nor would I, but I've been around and investigated what is the root cause, and stop talking about stuff that you don't know anything about.
Yeah.
And then releasing it to the press, because it continues to just stir the pot of anxious behavior, which keeps feeding the disorder that we want to try to prevent.
Right. And I can only believe that again, you know, it's all connected, right? So now you're going through this, you're dealing with all this PTSD, which you'll probably start to feel alone, and you'll start to isolate yourself. Then you fall into a deep depression, which affects all other parts of your life, and so on and so on. The cycle continues because these people don't get the proper help they need, because nobody wants to seem weak, you know. And it's just like it's sad when you actually think about it.
Well, and we've got to, you know, Leslie, you mentioned the magazine, and I'm so glad that there were great subscriptions and some sales of actual magazines. But we've got an article coming up about resiliency, which is a foundational component to help manage whatever the stressors that are part of the PTSD disorder can help. If we can help train people to be more resilient in their behavior management and their emotional controls, they're going to be less suspect or victims of the bad behaviors of others that escalate the stressors and the anxieties. So I wrote an article for the magazine about resiliency. It talked about, you know, things like meditation, good sleeping habits, nutrition, and these are preventative.
Yes.
Before we have a traumatic incident that gets in your dreams and doesn't let you forget it, and, you know, twists you up inside in quiet moments. And if we had these tools, almost like armament, emotional armament, we would be less susceptible, and we would have a better chance.
Yeah. And this is why I believe, like, to your point about, you know, starting at, let's say start at 14, let's say at high school level, freshman level. This is why I believe that there needs to be some sort of, I get it that schools have counselors on, but there needs to, for things like these, you need specialists at schools to work with athletes, to start to give them these tools at such an early age, because it just doesn't go into sports, it goes to all aspects of life, right? But these are amazing things. So if we really want to help, if we really care about people, then let's start at the age where it really starts to, where you can give them those tools to make that difference, and so they can now manage the things that they're going to possibly deal with, you know, when going and playing at sports at a high level, because college is still a high level, regardless of what people think. Everybody, if that was the case, then everybody could just walk on the field and play college ball at any level. I mean, any sport, they can't. So again, you're performing with some of the best players in the country at that level. And so what tools do I have going into this situation to help me, you know? And I think that would be, again, just, when I think of mental health, I think of this, since we're talking about men's mental health, I think that it needs to start out at such a younger age. And it's not just a hey, per case basis. I think that we all can afford to talk to somebody. And we can all afford to be given tools that needed, you know, to help us process emotions and things of this nature, just to be able to help us become better humans, you know, in general. So,
well,
I believe that it should be managed.
I didn't want to say it, but I believe, you know, because people Start to get to the social thought
No,
process. Oh, you're a socialist, but I 100%
yeah.
believe it should be mandated.
Hey, you know, I was on Lowe's podcast, and I said on your podcast, I said that I think that there should be mandated workshops for mental health. And I say that because a lot of males, I'll say males because we're talking about men's mental health, right? A lot of men are resistant to show up individually. So when something happens and you want them to show up to see you, even in law enforcement, police departments, VA, whatever, right? They don't want to show. Even when I was working at the FBI as an employee assistance program coordinator for the counterterrorism division, people didn't want to come see me because they were seeing without. So why not have a mandated program where everybody is mandated, have a schedule where people go every week, like half of the team go this week, the other half go the next week. You're not singled out because guess what? Everybody has to go and talk about mental health. And let me tell you, research shows that group is one of the best ways to normalize mental health experiences, especially in certain populations, such as men and other populations, so they can normalize their experiences and validate each other, right? As opposed to going one-on-one. So you decrease a little bit that shame and that embarrassment of having to go on your own, as opposed to having it mandated so that you just know, okay, half of the team is going to see someone next week. And it's just a routine. It's a regular
So
thing.
you're getting to the question of why. So the coach, that's the quote, what the coach will say. Why? Why should I have that? You're asking me to mandate it or make it.
Well, why should I have it? Because and my response would be because you have athletes killing themselves. How many did we have kill themselves last year? Or how many?
Regretfully, Leslie, there are some real punitive coaches out there, and they don't care. Mm-hmm. But here's what will get them, and both get them and get us able to get into the conference rooms, the auditoriums to teach in the off season what we're talking about. And what we do is we say, Coach, if you allow me to have this mental wellness programmatic process as part of the team every season for every player, here's what it will gain you, and answer your question about why. You will have a deeper, higher quality depth chart. Your 3-man won't drop off anything your 1-man is doing. It will be seamless. A 3 is still a 1 in performance because they're mentally aware and programmatically prepared to do what they need to do. And if you have a hiccup, something triggers a kid. The number 2 kid went in for the number 1 who was injured. 3 is still there, and you still have a chance to win a championship. When you equate the benefit of what we're talking about in terms that drive them every day to succeed. They want to win NCAA championship. They want to win NBA championship. They want to win a Super Bowl. Then it all of a sudden becomes extremely urgent. And I've had to face these battles. I got 15 minutes to train, and I stretched it to an hour because he started to see the quality of performance was rising. Their behavior on campus didn't give him headaches anymore. They weren't getting drunk on weekends and beating people up because they were engaged in the process of being themselves and being self-directed. So when we get to the pros, the why becomes more incorporated with economics and performance still. They still have to perform because they don't get more money if they don't perform. So franchise owners come into the mix in my world, in addition to the head coach and the GMs, about asking why. So it's a committee that reviews it. So for us, making sure our audience is communicated in a way that we really relate specifically to what their desires are as coaches, which interestingly enough, at least the vocabulary doesn't line up. If we use our vocabulary, they don't get it. If we can just
right about around why it's important, like
exactly
in their terms, right? And listen, you have on here, and I want you to go through this before we leave because I think it's really important for us to go through. You have a matrix on here that outlines sports athletes and mental illness. And, you know, I want to just to kind of normalize and validate experiences of men and whomever that deal with mental health. Can you just go through this matrix real quick and, you know, just the name, the sport, and the mental illness, because it's open.
Yeah,
It's
and
open
there's two
information.
components
So.
to the matrix you're referring to. One is a matrix that's very, very, you know, sterile. You know, it's like name, sport, team. They got medicated or they didn't, and it was depression or this. But then I have another matrix where it's the actual athlete saying, "This is what's happened to me," and those are two different distinctions. So I'll start off with one of my favorites on the list, and that's Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. And Dwayne has just recently been more vocal about his public awareness for others about his, and that's a huge step for him. He equates some of his lack of communicating that to why his first marriage failed, and also why he stayed away from interactions with others, because he was doing, as you pointed out, that exposure thing, that he wanted to be alone. I don't want to let it out of the bag. And he's gotten much better with that. And as a result, he's a better dad. He's a better partner. And he's, the truth has been helped by programmatic support that he went and found on his own to do that. Now, that's not in the matrix I showed you guys, but it is in the explanations that he has offered in the past. The other one is somebody I'm even closer than Dwayne, is Brandon Marshall. Now, Brandon's retired. He was a Super Bowl 50 Denver Broncos player. He was a defensive player. Brandon, I have a picture of Brandon next to my wife. He makes her look more shorter than 5'2" than she ever would want to be looked at as 5'2", and he's massive. So not just tall, but part of what I just said is part of what Brandon's whole disclosure is for his family. His mom didn't even know that he had a personality disorder. And I think that there's a bit of a, you know, we've got out so many labels, so many letters that name things. He truly is PTSD in the pure definition. But because of the other clinically emotional, neurological issues, he's bipolar. But the trauma that he incurred.
So what? Also
No,
PTSD, or are you just saying
he has been well, they didn't diagnose it because they went with bipolar first, because there's as you know, Leslie, there's a difference in medical prescriptions. Yeah, he was diagnosed earliest with PTSD, and then when they further went on, they identified the bipolar component, and that was a better fit because of the medications that were offered for bipolar, which were also going to help him foundationally with the PTSD as well, in addition to non-pharmacological stuff. So he's his whole diet changed in his last season in the NFL. He's continued with that, but Brandon is a classic person we're talking about here, as far as the five defining steps of PTSD and what he's gone through. But it's also an example of how it can be more than that, but not without kind, careful, and courageous examination by both the patient, family, and the physician. It's a team effort in support of that individual. And that Brandon is a great example of that.
Okay. So other people you have on here, you have Michael Phelps, who struggled with, and I don't know, this is based on your information, struggle with depression and anxiety. Yeah. Kevin Love, you guys know Michael Phelps is swimming. Kevin Love, basketball player with the Cleveland Cavaliers, anxiety and panic attacks. Naomi Osaka, professional tennis player, depression and anxiety. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, actor who you just talked about, depression. Simone Biles, who did gymnastics, anxiety and depression. So I just wanted to go through a list of those just to kind of validate that mental health does not discriminate. It does not discriminate based on age, race, socioeconomic status, how much money you have, who you are. We all, I think, experience mental health experiences either ourselves or vicariously. Vicariously means through someone else. And I also want to say, you know, we were talking about PTSD in athletes. PTSD, all athletes does not have PTSD. We're just, you know, talking about symptoms and characteristics of PTSD within that population and what it may look like from the expertise of Dr. Lowell Whiteman, who works with elite athletes and other athletes, and what they may look like. So just to say that, you know, we don't want to say everybody has, all athletes have PTSD. And sometimes, as we're talking about, it may be typical. It may not look like what we think PTSD would look like in a normal population that have experienced a traumatic event. And that's why this is important. And I'm talking about within athletes because it may be atypical and look like something else. Again, the symptoms, talking about symptoms here, the traumatic events might not, you know, maybe similar.
Well, and it goes back to our point. Very, very well done, Leslie, about the caveats and the considerations that need to be made. And that's, again, an issue that we have with professional sports. Because of the masculine predisposed attitude to not disclose, hide it because it jeopardizes our getting on the field and playing hard and all that kind of stuff. We have not opened the door to really looking at the culture and the environments that these athletes are in to identify what are the traumatic incidences that cause us to be able to clearly match up to the 5 defining components of PTSD versus anxiety. That's why I'm so passionate about the things I've been around, and I've seen and talked to the physicians because they ask me my input based on the fact I'm with the athletes all the time, and I see things that through a different window. And Michael's a good example of that. His mother is a professional educator. She's since now retired, but Michael was on the spectrum and doesn't spare any bones about that. You know, and he had ADHD. He was medicated. He was homeschooled. His mother was all part of that process because she was a professional educator. I think she actually ended up being a superintendent of a school district in Ohio. But at any rate, Michael, again, the professional sports don't want to look at it closely. And if they would have, Michael may not have gone through the path of suffering that he did and discontent that he had. Questioning, depression, all the different levels that he had. And I'm not saying that Michael had PTSD. I'm just saying that we need to be better at watching those we're responsible for.
But it sounds like, and I know we're about to end, but it sounds like a lot of these persons come into the sport with trauma histories, right? Yeah, a lot of people come into the sport with trauma histories, just like in the military. A lot of people go into the military with trauma histories because it's the way to get out. It's the way to get out of, especially men of color, right? Or women of color within a population, get out of environments, negative environments, get out of whatever it may be, but go into these professionals for a better life, right? So when if you don't assess that, it can be detrimental because you're taking somebody out of an environment, put them into another traumatic environment that, you know, you don't see as being traumatic, right? And then it just compounds, right? And everything just piles up on top of each other, like you were talking about.
And to Dr. Lowell's point earlier, that, but now we get into the resilient aspect of it, right? But then that resilience can be, because they have that certain level of resilience, again, they get overlooked for the sensitive aspect of it, or the wounded parts of the trauma parts of themselves, because, oh, no, you're good, you're strong, look at you, made it through this. And okay, cool, he made it through it, but it was because it was like I have to do this. I have to get out of the situation I'm in, or I have to get, or whatever it is, right, that I have to do. So now, you know, I just want to speak to the resilience aspect, which actually can be a negative. It's a positive, but it can be a negative because because now you get overlooked because of the things that you deal with, you know.
Yeah.
I remember I was working in Memphis, Counseling Center, and I had someone I was working with that came from out of the country. This person came, and she was like, you know, had a really dramatic injury that couldn't run track anymore, you know. And the first thing she asked me, what are my parents going to say? How am I going to go back home? Because her country expected her to come here and make it big, right? So now you have to go home because you can't play sports anymore. So then how are you looked upon when you return back home, right? So, and, you know, we groom our kids into going into sports, but we don't give them any other alternative, right? So one thing I asked her in talking about alternatives, you know, you're an excellent, she was number one on the track team. What else can you do? I can't do anything else, but you're an excellent player. Could you possibly work at a school and teach track, or could you work at a college and teach college sports, or could you go into sports in another arena as opposed to you running yourself? But again, they don't think about options because we groom our children into, this is what you're going to do. This is, you know, there's no other options. You're going to work out, but you don't think in a long run, because this is such a hard contact sport for many of these sports, even as ballet. You know, I've talked to people with ballet, you know, their feet, you know, when they can't dance anymore, what do? Right? Because these sports can result in significant injuries, then what do? Right? So even I say that because it's important. I would imagine that it's important when you're talking to your teams and having these mental health workshops, you should process alternative.
Well, and I also would want to process the source of those traumas. Like you mentioned, the dancer reminded me of a ballet dancer and also an ice skater, a female ice skater, which have similar injuries to their feet and legs because of the amount of pressure and power that they have to land on. It's also about a female basketball player. All three of them had different reasons why they needed to stay in the sport. And their traumas that they would dream about and manifest different scenarios and just all kinds of things fitting into both anxiety as well as clinical depression or PTSD, but no diagnosis, right? Nobody ever coming into understanding what's driving you to want to be a WNBA star. Well, the reason was I want to have the independence financially so I don't have to deal with the social pressure of people evaluating me and my orientation. I don't want them to have, I don't want to have to feel the pressure of having a partner. I just want to be me. Well, the money will allow me to do that. The same thing was with the ballet dancer. She got onto the New York ballet troupe. The money there would have freed her to be able to be whatever she wanted to be. She could interpret dance. She didn't have to do any of the toe moves anymore. There was these freeing things that came as real, but we're not doing that. We're not examining the sport as carefully as we do in planning the actual sporting event. And yet that's giving up the athlete, you know, for the sake of the game. And that's too bad. And again, to Wayne's point earlier, I'm not suggesting, coaches, that you don't play hard, that you don't strive to win. I'm just saying that you need to be more aware of the condition, both mentally and physically, of that athlete. So you've got the right person in the right place to give you what you need. And if they're not, get them out and put somebody else in there so you don't sacrifice that person. Because when their head's not right, they're going to get hurt.
It makes you wonder.
I don't have to wonder.
Oh, yeah, we know where it's at. Yeah, we know where it's at. Yeah. Easy.
Right. So look, so we didn't get to this, but I'll say real quick, you know, you have maintenance on here, you know, self-care. Self-care is important. Being aware of yourself and taking self-care days, engaging in meditation or reflection days, spending time with your family, loved ones, sleep hygiene, getting enough sleep is,
and that can be done at any age, Leslie. It can be from middle school up, you know, even massages and real good self-care. I mean, if mom's going to the spa, take Junior with you.
Healthy eating habits, time management, cognitive restructuring skills, Also, guys, if you if you're looking at this, and again, this is all about mental health, right? There's a new mental health number, *88. If you want to talk to someone in confidence, hit *88, a mental health hotline, and speak to somebody. No one has to know you're going, but yourself. But it's better to get help than to sit and try to treat yourselves, right? Because then things spiral out of control, and it becomes a bit challenging, to live
I think,
life
sorry.
a meaningful.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that also that I think that we think is that completely taking a break from whatever sport or thing that you're in. I know that may sound kind of productive to people, but just take a mental break. Just go travel, go do something else just to get away. Just give your mind that time to reset and just to refocus and just not have to think about those things that are going on. I think that's important. I love seeing athletes in the off season who play for professional teams going off to other countries with their families and just getting to do that. Just to get away, to get a break for yourself, and because you about to come back to this grueling workout. It's about to start all over again. So take all the breaks you can. Yeah. So.
Oh, good point.
Yeah. If you guys have anything else that you'd like us to talk about, we're open with next week. I don't want to do, so many weeks with a lot of heavy stuff. I want to kind of taper down and balance it out. So if you guys have anything that you'd like us to talk about, just I am one of us. Coach Lowell Whiteman, he's at 360 Mindset. Wayne Lassane is Wayne.Lassane.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, Wayne.Lassane, Lesane. And then I am at Dr. Leslie Rogers. So message either one of us and let us know if it's something specifically you like to talk about. I'm going to have a special guest on. I want to surprise you guys. It's an author of a book that's going to be awesome, but I'm trying to see when he's available, so I don't want to give his name today. But I want him to come on and tell his story. He has an amazing story of resilience and how he's overcome adversity. So that's going to be awesome. So any last things, any questions from you guys? This was PTSD. Hey, what are we going to talk about?
I don't know, but I think a lot of these things that we talk about all have a similar theme of men not being able to feel comfortable or safe enough to express themselves or talk about things that because of the culture that we live in. I think that's huge. I think that just transcends through so many different aspects of their life because us as men don't speak up, don't and express ourselves in the way that we should to get that help or to help us process these things is what puts us in these situations and to have to deal with things alone. So
yeah. But I think men are starting to speak up more.
Yeah,
they're not there yet. It's not enough. But they're starting to speak up more, but I don't think it's enough to kind of move.
Yeah, I think we need to continue to normalize. I think that to your point about groups, we need to, again, these are things that we can create and get these men in these groups to have these conversations to help them feel more comfortable because, okay, so he said it or he's going through it or he's dealing with it. So then, man, I can say it too. I see him and he's brave enough to talk about it. So then now I can. It gives myself permission to speak about it. So I think that these things are just great things that just need to continue to happen. And hopefully eventually we can stop talking about, making it normal because it is normal. It's just part of the culture. People seeking help and people being able to talk about things they're going through and feeling comfortable, so.
But this is, if you guys think about it, and then we're 4 minutes over. But if you guys think about it, I think that we are becoming a bit more liberal towards speaking about mental health. I think that men are, again, starting to come forward with mental health experiences. But like, I don't know which one of you guys said it, but again, you have to start with your children. You have to start bringing it into the home because every time when I interview somebody for the magazine and I ask that question, was it spoken about in your home, depending on the age of the person? It wasn't, right? But now, as we progress and become more modern, we're talking about mental health and more liberal and outspoken about mental health and mental illness. You can talk about it in your home and, decrease those anxieties. Yeah. Let the kids know it's okay. Normalize, bring in resources like age-appropriate resources to help that process. There's a lot of kids books out here that can initiate discussion around mental health and mental illness, right? I brought in, for a kid I'm working with, I brought in a YouTube video around anxiety and let him watch that anxiety tape. And then I asked, do you ever feel these ways? Right? To kind of normalize those experiences, and it helped him communicate those experiences. So technology is at your fingertips, guys. Use it. Use it to engage your children, engage loved ones, and things of that sort. Yeah, absolutely. Look at, and when you think about therapy, you learn tools in therapy too to take back home to your loved ones as well. So it's not all a bad thing, right?
Well, and I
use it as a positive.
Leslie, I've said this many times. I agree with you that we are moving forward. There's more liberal nature to reaching out, but we have a paradigm that still needs to be shifted. It hasn't moved far enough. From instead of looking at it as illness, we have to look at it as wellness and prevent shifting into the abyss. You know, constantly programmatically, you know, giving people the ammunition and prevention they need. And that's why I have adopted a new saying for myself: connect the connections, make it real, and make it work. Connect the connection. Because, you know, Wayne Lassane, he is. He is.
Y'all, so we're going to jump up. Let me tell you, can I tell y'all a funny thing right now? Y'all know when you're getting old, right? I'm looking around for my phone. I'm like, where the heck is my phone at? And it's I'm talking on it.
Yeah, like where's my pencil? Where's my pencil?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is right. I'm on Instagram, guys.
That's a great way to end.
Yeah. Go ahead, guys.
Yes.
You be good, okay?
All right, guys. So we see you next Monday with another excellent topic. So don't be here 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time with Dr. Roger.
Yes, let's
Dr.
do it.
Will
All right.
Whiteman and Wayne Lassane. Talk to you soon.